Greetings, fans of old heavy rock bands. This is Music as a Journey. I'm Peter, and this video is part 3 in a series I'm doing where I revisit the recent releases of old bands whose studio discographies I have either complete or nearly complete. In the very first episode, I took a look at the last 3 albums by Judas Priest. That was Redeemer of Souls, as well as the Five Souls EP, Firepower, and Invincible Shield. And in the second video, I revisited the last 4 albums of Deep Purple, going from Now What to Infinite, Whoosh, and Equals One. I did not look at their Turning to Crime album, which was an album of covers. I'm looking at albums of original material. And same goes with today's band too. I'm only looking at their recent albums of original material. So this video here, I'll be looking at the last 5 albums of Uriah Heep. Before we get into that though, I always like to start these videos by giving my personal background of my experience being interested in the band. So I bought my very first Uriah Heep album on cassette, probably 1984 or possibly 1985, and my very first purchase was Salisbury. Time to Live was my favorite song on that album because that was just the heaviest. The cassette version I had did not have Bird of Prey. Instead, it had a song called Simon the Bullet Freak, which is more of a laid-back song with the piano and a more of a smooth feeling to it. So Time to Live was the heaviest track on the cassette version I had. The next album I got was Look at Yourself, and that remains my favorite Uriah Heep album because I just really love early 70s heavy hard rock, and what a great guitar tone Mick Box has on that album. Then there was Demons and Wizards, also a great album with great guitar tone. The Magician's Birthday, very heavy, very humble. And later on, I was able to get copies on cassette of Abominog, Head First, and even found a used copy of Firefly. By the 1990s, I picked up Sweet Freedom, but after the excellent fantasy-themed albums previous to that, I found Sweet Freedom a bit of a letdown. And the very last album I bought during that kind of initial period from the 80s through to the 90s, well, I did have a copy of Innocent Victim on vinyl because around 1989, my dad brought home a record player. And since Innocent Victim wasn't available on cassette, I was able to buy a vinyl record and play it at home. And then finally, Sea of Light I bought somewhere towards the end of the 90s or early 2000s. And after that, I didn't buy anything by Uriah Heep for quite some time. However, a couple of years ago, I made 2 videos. One was a video on the ranking of the albums of Uriah Heep. And for that particular video, I checked a dozen different ranking lists on the internet, either on websites or on YouTube, and found what the average score was of the average ranking score of each of those albums, and then put together a list based on that. Also, around the same time, I did a video on the first 10 albums of Uriah Heep as part of a series I did of the first 10 albums of a dozen bands in that year. So during that time, because I was finding out more information about Uriah Heep, looking into their back catalog more, I just decided to fill up my Uriah Heep collection as much as possible. And I got down to missing 4 albums. So also 2023, 2 years ago when I did this, that was when Chaos and Color was released, which was their 25th album. So the albums I didn't have Head First on CD, but I did have it on cassette back in the day. I did not have Conquest, which I've actually never seen on CD. And I didn't have Equator, which was available on CD, but after listening to it on YouTube, I thought it was just really not an album I needed to have unless I absolutely must complete the studio catalog. There's one more album then, that was High and Mighty, which was always out of my price range until just the other day, I happened to find it on an online flea market. The 1997 release, used but in very good condition, no marks, visible marks or scratches. And because I actually had some money on the account of that flea market, I was able to purchase it without making any damage to my credit card. And so Ha! There it is. So now let's take a look at the band's situation at the beginning of this last 5-album run. Just to let you know, before starting this video, I listened to each of the albums 3 times completely through. And then after making a selection of favorite songs, I've listened to those favorite songs again at least 2 times more, in some cases 3 times more. So all of my videos so far, and the ones to come after, we're taking it from 2010 up to 2025. And there's a reason for that. In the case of Judas Priest, in 2011, they were going on their Epitaph tour, basically thinking that that was the end of the band. They were going to wrap things up. KK Downing left. They got in Richie Faulkner to help finish the tour, and that was supposed to be it. However, they decided things worked so well with Richie and they still had songs to write, so they began the process of writing a new album, recording a new album, which ultimately became Redeemer of Souls, released in 2014, and they've since gone on touring and recording. Deep Purple, similar thing. After Rapture of the Deep in 2006, there was some sentiment with some members in the band that maybe it wasn't really worth the effort to write, record, and release an album when there was so little money to be made from the sales. Maybe they should just tour only, because that's where they got their money from. And of course, royalties. However, they then did decide they did want to go ahead and record a new album, and that was Now What? And, you know, since then there have been 3 other studio albums of original material, plus a covers album. So Uriah Heep in 2008, we see the band rejuvenating at that point. See, the last album they released prior to that was 1998's Sonic Origami. And in an interview I saw or read with Mick Box, he said that because of the way things were going with the music industry, people were file sharing, albums were being downloaded for free. They wondered if there was any worth for them to write and record and release a new album, similar to the sentiment we heard from Deep Purple, which, interestingly, the Deep Purple interviews I read were around the same time that Uriah Heep did decide to go ahead and release a new album. So there was a 10-year gap from 1998 to 2008. So that's why instead of starting from 2010 onwards, with Uriah Heep, we're actually starting from 2008, because they had that 10-year gap where they weren't so sure if it was worthwhile to record and release anything. Now, also, it's with the other bands, we saw some important change happening. And with Uriah Heep, we see drummer Lee Kerslake, longtime drummer Lee Kerslake, decides to quit the band due to health reasons in 2007. So, interesting to note that the lineup that was Mick Box on guitars, Lee Kerslake on drums, Trevor Bolder on bass, Phil Lanson on keyboards, and Bernie Shaw on vocals, that lineup had remained steady from 1986 up to 2007. That's 21 years that Uriah Heep ran with the same 5 members. And what is probably almost equally surprising is that during that 21-year period, they only released 4 albums. Raging Silence in 1988, Different World in 1991, Sea of Light, which was 94, 95, and Sonic Origami in 1998. That's it. 4 albums in 21 years. So a new drummer, Russell Gilbrook, joins the band in 2008. And what's also interesting here is that it's noteworthy to say, despite the frequent lineup changes that happened from 1970 up to 1986, from 1986 onwards, there have only been 2 members changing in the band's lineup. One of them being Lee Kerslake, who left the band due to his health reasons, and the other member, well, we're going to get to that a little bit down the road here. Now, Bernie Shaw on vocals and Phil Lanson joined in the mid-80s. Phil joined first, Bernie after that. They had another singer before Bernie who didn't appear in any recordings, but he didn't last long, and Bernie Shaw came in. Bernie and Phil had previously played together in the early 80s in a band called Grand Prix. And Bernie Shaw has been Uriah Heep's vocalist for 39 years now, joining in 1986, and now it's 2025. Next year, it's 40 years with the band. That is pretty amazing. During those 39 years, Bernie Shaw has been the lead vocalist on 9 albums. And what's interesting is that David Byron, the original vocalist, was also the lead vocalist on 9 albums. So David Byron from 1970 to 1976, 9 albums. Bernie Shaw from 1986 to 2025, 9 albums. Tells you something about the pace of recording and releasing albums in the 1970s. So the 5 albums we're going to be taking a look at: Wake the Sleeper from 2008, Into the Wild from 2011, Outsider from 2014, Living the Dream from 2018, and Chaos in Color from 2023. I will say that going into this was more daunting than with the previous 2 bands because, first of all, it's 5 albums that I had to listen to 3 times each, as opposed to Deep Purple's 4 and Judas Priest's, well, 3.5. Also, in the case of Uriah Heep's last 5 albums, there is a sameness to most of the music. In the 1970s, Uriah Heep was quite diverse, and actually I've been going back and revisiting even some of their 90s material. It's also quite diverse, so you get this journey the band took with their music from 1970 up to 1998. You could pick almost any album in here that it stands apart from other albums. However, these 5 are all very similar sounding. You have the heavy distorted guitar, you have the heavy Hammond organ, drums, bass, and of course vocals. Bernie Shaw doing the lead vocals, but I think also Phil Lanzon contributes some vocals, certainly backing or supporting vocals, and then you also have some of these chorus harmony vocals as well in places. So this is the main setup for practically every song on those 5 albums. You will get some acoustic guitar or clean guitar in a couple of tracks on each album. There is some synthesizer used very sparsely throughout those 5 albums, and quite a few tracks featuring some piano, but not the diversity that we're used to from 5 different Uriah Heep albums. Now, in the case of Deep Purple, and I don't really want to compare Deep Purple to Uriah Heep, perhaps that's not really fair, but I was really surprised going back to revisit the Deep Purple albums because I felt there were some songs that really showed the band was still interested in trying new things and recording music with sounds and approaches that simply hadn't been done on their previous albums. I don't get that feeling from these 5 Uriah Heep albums. They're pretty much following a similar format: heavy rock, rock guitar, heavy Hammond organ, powerful vocals. So let's begin with Wake the Sleeper, very appropriately titled because the band had been absent from the recording studio for nearly a decade. So this was waking up the band and getting back into action. The album released in 2008, produced by Mike Paxman. Here inside, advertising for Wake the Sleeper t-shirts. There's the disc itself. And I don't think there was much. Oh, there's a bit of a booklet in here as well. And the back cover. I said that there's a certain sameness to all 5 of these albums, but after my second time visiting them, I found more and more songs from this album were standing out for me and catching my attention. It's worthy to mention the opening track, Wake the Sleeper, is limited in lyrics and vocals. There's a lot of ahs and then wake the sleeper repeated in a couple of places, but otherwise it is mostly an instrumental, and the band is just charging heavy and solid. And the cool thing is, in one place there is a wah-wah guitar solo and drum solo together, just those 2 instruments, for a short time, but it brings back memories of The Magician's Birthday with the guitar and drum battle that was going on between the 2 wizards, the good and the bad wizard. Who was who? As for the rest of the album, let's see here. We've got Overlord, Tears of the World, Angels Walk With You, Ghost in the Ocean. All of these are tracks that after the 3rd listen, I was pulling out to put aside on a special playlist of favorites. War Child and Shadow are two heavy songs also that I really like, that really showcase that modern heavy Uriah Heep sound. But my favorite one actually has turned out to be What Kind of God, which is a song told from the perspective of Native North Americans, Indigenous North Americans, as they are up against the white man. And the line that really kind of stood out for me is one where they say they gave us religion and then forced us to live behind their borders. Yeah, thinking about another album I'd been listening to earlier this year, told from the perspective of a Native person, it seems to me that religion was basically the distraction, teach them about Christianity, teach them about God and the Savior and all this kind of thing. And then while they're busy being distracted and convinced that that religion is superior to whatever they believed in, then the colonizers come in and just start taking over. And if you want to say anything about it, they're just going to go against you with violence, So yeah, thanks for that religion there, guys. Worked out really well for us. Anyway, yeah, so that has turned out to be the song that I really like the best. Musically, I like it, but also I like the lyrics, the story that it tells. So turns out, maybe it's early to say this, but early in the video, but after the first 5 albums, listening to them over and over, this one has probably been the one with the longest list of favorite songs. Next up, Into the Wild from 2011. I've got this one inside a little bag here. I'm sorry about that. And I'm not going to take it out because you know the album, I hope. Anyway, also produced by Mike Paxman. And this one here, there were a lot of great songs on there too. I actually played all 5 of them on a playlist on shuffle at one point. And then when I heard a song, I thought, that song sounds cool. What's that one? And I would take a look. And there were actually quite a few from this one that also got my attention. So the opening track, Nail on the Head, that's pretty good, more straight up rocker, but has some things like, especially we hit the nail right on the head. We hit the nail right on the head. Boom, boom. Just that adds a little touch to it that makes it a little bit more of a fun, hard rocking song. Money Talk, Trail of Diamonds is interesting because it combines the more softer approach with the heavier approach. The title track, Into the Wild, is cool. I Can See You and Believe are all tracks that really stood out for me. However, my absolute favorite one on this album is Lost. It has this heavy, almost ominous type heavy feel to it. And then these like some spacey effects here and there. Just a really, really cool track. So Lost from this one here. So I quite like this album. And someone who recently commented on my Uriah Heep ranking video gave his list of his top 10 favorite albums. And this one was number 9 or number 10 on his list. So that's cool to see one of the more recent albums showing up on someone's top 10 Uriah Heep list. In May of 2013, longtime bass player Trevor Bolder sadly passed away, and so they had to bring in a new bass player, Dave Rimmer. And this is the second lineup change that I was talking about previously from 1986 on. So just Lee Kerslake leaving the band, and then Trevor Bolder passing on and being replaced by Dave Rimmer. And so that's it. 2 members changing in the lineup since 1986. That is a pretty darn good track record for a band that went through a lot of members in their early years. After that, we go to 2014 with Outsider. This one is not in any kind of little baggy thing here, so we can open it up, see the disc, see the artwork inside. There's a little booklet. I actually had to get most of these used because they just weren't available anymore. So again, Mike Paxman producing, and there's a song on here called 1 Minute. Now this one here, I think this is Bernie Shaw's story, because Bernie Shaw is from Victoria, British Columbia in Canada. In the 1970s, he played in 2 or 3 different Canadian bands, and things weren't really taking off. So I think it was around 1978, 79, he just decided to go to London and try things out there. And then he joined the band, originally called Paris, but later on changed the name to Grand Prix. He returned to Canada to attend his sister's wedding, and when he went back to the UK, he found he had been replaced by Robin McAuley. Yeah, of Macaulay Schenker, right? And he played in a couple of different other bands. I think he actually even appeared on a couple of different recordings before finally joining up with Uriah Heep in 1986. So anyway, his original story, leaving Canada and going to London, I think that's what the song 1 Minute tells about, because there's something about leaving on a wing and a prayer, going for one more shot at the great out there, riding in a railway car, presumably going from the, Heathrow Airport into London. And just things about, making the right connections, and everything's going to work out. You just need to give it time. Good things come to those who wait. And there are two versions on here. One of them is the original album version, which opens with some lovely piano and then goes into an electric rock song. But there's another version added on as a bonus track where it's all done with acoustic guitar and piano. Otherwise, more or less the same song. But both versions, very, very good. I think I like it a lot because now I know the story of the lyrics. Could be that story of Bernie Shaw. Also, is anybody gonna help me? The title track, Outsider. Jesse, Kiss the Rainbow. I don't like the title, but the song itself is pretty good. Looking at You and Say Goodbye are all tracks that stood out for me from this album here on the third time through. However, I honestly found this album to be the most difficult to stay focused on while listening. And I think it's because the production sounds a little tired. Like the electric guitar is not so strong in the mix, and it doesn't have that real rock feel that I felt on the previous two albums. So something is missing from this album for me, and that's why it's just a little bit harder to naturally kind of gravitate to any particular song and say, wow, that one's just killer. I actually had to go back and say, how is this one again? How is this one again? Before I could even pick the ones that I liked. So the fourth album in the series, Living the Dream from 2018. This time, new producer Jay Rutson is on here. So let's just open up the package. There's the CD, photo of the band. Oh, some little advertising thing here popping out. Look at that. I put the disc in upside down. So it looks like I have two discs. One is a DVD. You know, I actually haven't watched it yet. And there's the booklet in the middle there. Wow, I actually forgot that I had a DVD. I usually don't have time to watch DVDs. If it's not on YouTube, I don't have time to watch. But yeah, so one thing to say with the new producer, this sounds much better than the last three albums. Even though I really liked Wake the Sleeper and Into the Wild, had no problems with the sound quality. This just sounds better. I can hear the guitar more clearly. The drum sound is much better. The bass sounds really cool. Everything sounds just that much better overall, in my opinion, on this album. The person, by the way, who commented on my rankings, the videos, ranking the albums of Uriah Heep video, who gave his top 10 favorites, he included this one also in his top 10. So let's see here. I said the sound comes alive on this album. Very good mix, big improvement over Outsider. But not as many songs stand out for me, even after listening to it 3 times and going back and revisiting some of the songs. Grazed by Heaven, the title track, Living the Dream. I like how at the end of Living the Dream, there's this new musical theme that is introduced on the Hammond organ, and the song closes out with an instrumental section that is different from the rest of the song. That is the kind of thing I would have expected from Uriah Heep, that they would have this like more parts to the songs or more change-ups. And one thing, if I may say, older Uriah Heep also had lots of parts where it was just one instrument playing or just 2 instruments playing. And this is less so on these more recent albums. It's more the whole band is playing. There might be an intro, a guitar intro, a keyboard intro, and then the whole band just comes in for most of the songs. So less variety in that way, and less of this more adventurous song structure where they go into some different part and a different part. It's mostly just, intro, verse, chorus, solo, verse, chorus type of thing for most of the songs. But anyway, the title track here has that little bit of, something different happens in the end part. It's All Been Said and Dreams of Yesteryear are also songs that I picked out, although I can't really remember why. I probably just liked them more than others. But the song that has always stood out for me on this album is Rocks in the Road. It's my favorite since I first heard the album, and that's because we start off with a good heavy rocker, guitar and organ, goes into a more mellow part, softer part, and then there is this, like, half the song is an instrumental thing, starting off simply with a bass, boom, 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 and a bit of drums. The guitar coming in just sparsely, like da 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 da, boom, da 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 da, like this kind of thing. And then the Hammond organ comes in doing a solo, and the solo kind of builds in intensity and excitement. And then finally there's a changeover, and then we get into a more exciting, faster paced track with the guitar solo. And then at the end, it wraps up with the intro to the song. So that is the kind of thing I would be really excited to hear about on a Uriah Heep album. Something where the music, I mean, this band has talent to compose really good instrumental parts. And I feel like we're not hearing it as much outside of the usual guitar and organ solos that are on most of the songs. So that brings us up to finally Chaos and Color. It is in a little band here because I've got this patch that came on the back. It opens up like there's a little booklet. It has, like, you know, the little spine and everything, a little booklet inside with pictures and lyrics and that. Really nice little package. Glad to have the patch. Don't really have any place to put it. Can't sew, but I'm just keeping it anyway. Love the colorful cover on the black background too. So again, the sound quality is really good. There was one song while I was listening to it, I thought, man, the drums really sound good on this album. And same with the last one. It's Jay Rutson producing again. So yeah, same really nice kind of clear feeling. You can hear all the instruments clearly and feel the power in the instruments as well. So a lot of tracks I picked off here: Hail the Sunrise, Hurricane, One Nation, One Sun, Save Me Tonight, Silver Sunlight. There's a sun theme here: Hail the Sunrise, One Nation, One Sun, Sunlight. But there are two songs that really stood out for me. One is You'll Never Be Alone, which is actually a bit close to the classic Uriah Heep, because we start off with a very beautiful bit of piano and tells a story about a young girl playing down by the riverside, but then there's this little creature that comes up, and then he invites her, or it invites her, to join him, you know, underground, where all her fantasies will be lived out and, you know, never need of anything. And she basically enters a fantasy realm, and it sounds all really positive and exciting and wonderful at first, but then she finds out that they have been luring children into that underworld, and many missing children from the above world are down here. And then some part of the story, the lyrics, I haven't really listened to carefully yet. But at the end of the song, by the way, it gets into a really more heavier and rockin' part here after the gentle beginning, but then we get back to the gentle beginning at the end of the song. But this time there's a little bit more of an ominous feel to it, like foreboding feel to it. And now we have a little boy playing by the stream, and it seems that possibly the little girl has now come to sing softly to him, and we can guess maybe she will also convince him to go down to the magical world below. So that song has a great story to it as well, different parts to the music, softer, pretty part, and the heavier part. So that's really cool. And then finally, there's Freedom to Be Free, which I almost passed off as being maybe yes, maybe no, until the bass solo came in. They actually have a bass solo section where the band plays something, and then you just get the bass, and the band again, and the bass again, and the band again, and the bass again. And it's just really cool like that. The sound is awesome. So that song just gets extra points for having a bass solo. Okay, that's it. That's my impressions, opinions of the last 5 Uriah Heep albums. Again, I would say that the main positive points is the band is playing mostly heavy stuff. There's very little synthesizer, very little pop feeling to it. It is basically heavy, hard rockin' songs with guitar and Hammond organ. Some lighter stuff with piano and acoustic, but not so much. The negative aspect is I don't feel the music is as adventurous as they have been in the past. And I think the band has the potential to be more creative in their song writing structure or like music compositions. I would like to hear that a little bit more if I could, but it seems after 5 albums of similar approach, it's probably not likely to happen on the next album. And the other thing is that I just don't feel there's as much space between the instruments. Most of the time, it's just everybody playing at once. There's not a lot of that, just the organ going now, or organ and guitar. And it happens in just a few rare places. But still, any one of these albums sounds really good. Any one of these songs is a great example of what the band are doing these days. And hey, if they're going to keep on rocking hard and heavy, God bless them. Anyway, that's it for my revisiting the albums, the recent albums of Uriah Heep, and I'll be back again in a week or two after having revisited the most recent albums of yet another old band in my collection. Thank you all for watching. Leave your comments below. Do you have any of these albums? What do you think of them? What do you think of Uriah Heep? What are your favorites? I'd love to hear anything you have to say. Leave me a comment. I'll respond. Thanks again for watching. Catch you in another video. Bye, folks.